And joining us now is Joseph Romm. Joe Romm, as Wikipedia puts it, is an American author, blogger, physicist, and climate expert. I love that Wikipedia puts blogger above physicist in the list of human accomplishments. He is an expert in climate science. He has concentrated on methods of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. He has also been acting assistant secretary of energy for energy efficiency and renewable energy. And he has been listed, among other things, as one of the 100 people who are changing America, according to Rolling Stone. Joe, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure.
Now, listen, I wanted to ask you today about the president's plan, his new energy plan, what you think of it, how far it goes, the impact you think it'll have, and what else we might need to do. So let's start with your initial thoughts on the president's energy plan.
Well, I think it's very important. I think people should understand that, we have to get off of fossil fuels because global warming is occurring even faster than we expected, and the recent science and observations make that clear. And the world is expecting is in December going to have a major negotiations in Paris to finalize what will be the first ever deal for the entire world to change the course of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. And the United States made a pledge back in November, President Obama did, with the president of China, a deal which got China for the first time ever to cap their emissions. So there's this whole chain where, in order for the U.S. to keep its commitment, we need to this Clean Power Plan, which is authorized under the Clean Air Act, and in fact required by the Supreme Court ruling of 2007. So Obama had to do something. He has done, I think, a reasonable proposal on the table. This enabled a global deal with China, which basically cracked open this bottleneck that had prevented a global treaty, and now everyone is much more hopeful. So, I see this as a crucial part of the chain to the world finally starting to fight climate change.
So if I understand you correctly, Joe Romm, then one of the things you're saying is that by doing this, essentially the president is keeping his part of the deal with China, keeping that deal alive and allowing those negotiations to go to the next stage. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, I think, obviously global warming is a global problem. And, for 25 years, people had said China is never going to limit carbon pollution because it just wants to keep growing and growing. And that was true until November, until this deal that President Obama made with, it was a public pronouncement by President Obama and the head of China. And that announcement of that deal all of a sudden woke up the rest of the world that, the two biggest polluters were finally, for the first time in history, going to get serious about both reversing the carbon pollution trends, and that opened up a logjam, literally, well, figuratively, which got many other countries to make commitments, and now there's a lot of hope. Not that we have solved the climate problem, but for the first time ever, the world, not just the rich countries, but also most of the developing countries, are going together to make commitments.
So that's encouraging, because I've also heard criticism, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, criticism that this doesn't go far enough in reducing emissions.
Yeah, well, I wrote a long piece on climate progress earlier this week, Monday, in which I said I thought this was the least a moral nation could do. I mean, people need to understand we are the biggest cumulative polluter of carbon pollution, and it is the cumulative emissions of CO2 that cause the warming, that cause the extreme weather and the ice to melt and sea levels to rise. And we're also the richest country. So clearly, if the richest country and biggest long-term polluter isn't going to take any action, it's awfully hard to convince anybody to take any action. So we had to do something, and this was enough to get China moving. But if you study the science, it's quite clear that the world is going to have to ultimately go beyond whatever comes out of these Paris negotiations. What President Obama put on the table with the Chinese is a 26 to 28% reduction in total U.S. carbon dioxide emissions. Now, the Clean Power Plan is all about existing power plants. And existing power plants are responsible for about a third of U.S. carbon pollution. And so if you're going to tackle, you're going to get total reductions, absolute reductions in U.S. carbon dioxide emissions, you must get power plants.
Right.
In 2007, there was a court case. You probably reported it on it at the time. Massachusetts versus EPA. The Supreme Court. The question was, did the EPA have to regulate, have to put in carbon pollution standards for power plants and other sources like cars, based on the fact that they have to regulate things that endanger public health and well-being under the Clean Air Act? And the Supreme Court decided yes, that not only did the EPA have the right to do that, but insofar as the EPA found carbon pollution was a danger to humans and the environment, that they had to. They were legally obligated. So that's and the Bush administration did nothing for 2 years. Obama came in, and he has been endeavoring to follow the law, and he was supposed to do the mobile sources first, and so that was why you had to deal with the automakers on fuel efficiency standards for cars, the first fuel efficiency standards since the 1980s. And after the mobile sources, he was supposed to do the stationary sources, and the biggest ones of those were our power plants. So it's all been following a legal chain of events since the 2007 Supreme Court ruling.
And Joseph Romm, physicist and climate expert, what's next? If we've done the mobile sources, we've done the stationary sources, or rather the president has, and then I want to get back to the depth or intensity of the plan. But so what's left after this?
Well, there are a lot of smaller things. You may have seen, for instance, that the president and his team had proposed fuel economy standards for large trucks, a few months ago. Right. So, in other words, once you tackle the big things like automobiles and SUVs and power plants, then there are a lot of medium-sized emitters that you start discussions with the industry to see what is possible, and put those on the table. But there's no question that far and away, cars, light trucks, SUVs, and then electric utilities, power plants are the big ones. Those are the most important. Those are what allow the U.S. to make an absolute commitment to reduce carbon pollution by 2025.
Now, Joseph Romm, you said that this plan announced by the president was essentially the minimum that a moral nation could do. What would you see as the ideal plan, roughly, that a moral nation would do under these circumstances?
Well, so the U.S. commitment is that we have made as a public pledge to the world in the months leading up to the Paris negotiations is this 26 to 28% reduction in carbon pollution by 2025 compared to 2005 levels. Now, every other country is using a 1990 baseline. U.S. emissions went up considerably from 1990 to 2005. So the fact that we use a higher baseline means that if you want to actually compare ours, you have to go back to 1990 levels. And in that case, the U.S. commitment is much closer to a 14 to 17% reduction below 1990 levels. Now, you can compare that to the entire European Union. The entire European Union announced last year that their pledge for the Paris negotiations was 40% reductions below 1990 levels by 2030. So we're 14 to 17% by 2025, a fairly big gap. And we are very comparable to the European Union, because if you compare total cumulative emissions of carbon from the United States and total from the European Union, they are 27% and 25%. So it is the rich countries that have the historical legacy. So most people would say that the European Union commitment is, it is stronger, and it's much closer to the kind of commitment that one needs to get to in order to do this, stabilizing total planetary warming by the end of this century at a 2 degrees centigrade total, which is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And people may have heard of this 2 degrees centigrade target. That is the target that the scientists of the world and the governments of the world have honed in on over the last decade of reviewing the science and reviewing what is both scientifically necessary and technologically feasible.
Now, and as I understand it, Joseph Romm, if we don't reach that target, if we significantly overshoot that target, the consequences are going to be severe.
Yes, there's no everything we know now is that certain aspects of climate change are happening faster than we thought. Some aspects are happening just about as fast as we thought, including surface air temperatures. Other things, like the loss of Arctic ice, and in particular the rate of loss of ice from the landlocked glaciers, which is ice that when it melts and goes from the land to the sea, raises sea levels, that is disintegrating much faster than anybody thought. And the science and observations of the last year and a half suggest that if even 2 degrees centigrade, we are risking quite literally 20 feet of sea level rise. Now,
and the submersion of lower Manhattan and all that, right? And
all of South Florida, and 40-50% of the world's population lives within a few miles of the coast. That's where our great cities and ports and all that are. Now, for a long time, people thought that this destruction, particularly of the great ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland, would take 1,000 years or more to occur. But the world's leading experts do not believe that is the case anymore. No one knows for certain, but the latest science suggests that it literally could happen on the time frame of 100 or 200 years, and clearly the hotter it is, the faster it's going to occur.
And Joseph Romm, as a climate scientist, which you are one of the leading ones in the country, I guess that gets to my final question, and forgive me if it seems unfair in any way, but leaving aside the right-wing refusal to acknowledge the reality of climate science and climate change, why do you think it is that so many people in this country appear to lack a sufficient sense of urgency about this? This is frightening stuff. And it seems to me that a lot of people, even people who aren't on the right, they recognize it's a problem, but maybe their hair isn't on fire about it the way it seems to me it ought to be. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, yes. Clearly, if you spend a lot of time talking to climate scientists, I'm more of a scientist who writes about climate scientists. If you spend a lot of time talking to them, their hair is definitely on fire. Now, I have to say two things. Climate scientists, until recently, have not been great at communicating the dire nature of the situation. The scientists aren't trained to do that type of communications. We also have a somewhat unique, not unique, but a situation similar to what happened with the tobacco industry, which is that the fossil fuel industry is spending a lot of money to spread disinformation and confusion and mislead people. And I think that they have been effective, and they have tools, like, to be honest, Fox News and similar types of outlets that repeats things that are not scientifically true. And it took us a exceedingly long time to regulate, to warn people of the dangers of cigarette smoking, from the time that scientists first knew that it was killing people and making them sick. So we have a democratic system. Every interested party has the ability to speak in public. Some people can hire professional firms and do a masterful job at their public relations. Scientists obviously don't go around hiring experts in communications and public relations to communicate what they think is a straightforward message. So I think there's a lot of those reasons have combined. All I can say on it's one of the reasons I became a blogger. I launched Climate Progress was to do that kind of communicating directly. I think the scientific community has gotten better. I think a lot of people have started to catch on. The clearest example of that is the Pope. And the Pope is not a scientific expert, but he has convened scientific experts. The Vatican has a scientific panel which has reviewed all this, and they've said, the science, we know enough about the science, it's time to do something, and that's where the Pope can speak about our moral responsibilities, and he issued the encyclical, which I urge everybody to read. It's a 195-page document explaining why it is literally immoral for us, who have enjoyed tremendous wealth while putting in pollution that is going to damage a livable climate for literally billions of people and for decades or centuries to come.
For all future generations. And I thank you so much for your work in this area, for injecting morality and common sense into this debate, and for coming on the program, Joseph Romm.
My pleasure. Thank you. Anytime.
I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.